We are not alone. Non-human intelligence will be the defining discovery of our current era. See, on one hand, we're racing at a breakneck speed to create some form of artificial intelligence within our machines, while at the same time, increasingly sophisticated tools for measurement and detection seem to be alluding to some other type of non-human intelligence in the form of UFOs. In this video, I want to answer one burning question. Now that we have two more points on the map of cognition, where exactly does that put us on the terrain of intelligence? If you stick around until the end of this video, I'm also going to share with you one shocking realization that I had about what links these two phenomena together, and I have to warn you, the consequences of this realization may well turn your entire conception of reality upside down. Homo sapien, that's us, is Latin for the wise man, the very thing that defines us as separate from the rest of all of life is our ability to utilize our intelligence to forge our awareness into knowledge, and then furthermore to temper that knowledge with experience into wisdom. Considering that we may no longer be the only intelligent entity on the face of this planet, I don't want this video to merely contribute to the increasing knowledge of AI and of aliens. Instead, I want to take this opportunity to do something bigger, to apply what limited knowledge we do have on these two topics to our experience of, being alive in order to develop a broader wisdom of these two phenomena. Up until just a few years ago, artificial intelligence research was kind of considered this fringe science, relegated to only science fiction novels and maybe movies. But nobody actually took it really that seriously. That is, of course, until artificial intelligence research started to bear fruit. As it stands right now, AI is kind of considered maybe even the biggest creation of our generation. And all of the researchers that had previously derided the field have done a complete 180 and fully support it now, and honestly, a lot of them deny ever having opposed the idea in the first place. In a similar fashion, the UFO phenomena is approaching a very similar transformation. Up until just recently, anybody that dared even mention UFOs in polite conversation was automatically labeled a quack, and any idea that they put forward past that point was deemed automatically suspect by association. So, what changed? For one thing, the highest levels of the US government are actively investigating the existence of UFOs, and furthermore, there's a parallel increase in the sophistication of scientific instruments for detection and measurement with the quality and quantity of UFO sightings, implying some sort of causal link. And now we have verifiable high-resolution video, infrared, and radar imaging of UFOs, as well as a critical mass of credible whistleblowers from all levels of government testifying to the physically tangible existence of intelligently controlled craft whose flight characteristics seem to defy the laws of physics. I'm reminded of a historical anecdote from another great leap forward in scientific understanding, and that is the invention of Galileo's telescope. And when he first pointed it towards the skies, he invited a member of the clergy to come look through the telescope. When the priest looked through the telescope, he was dazzled at what he saw and claimed that this device must cause hallucinations. Only then did Galileo explain the nuts and bolts of the mechanism, at which time the priest said, well then, it must be observing angels in the sky. Only then did Galileo tell this priest that no, in fact, these were stars and planets which he was observing. And at that point, the priest declared that he was a heretic and outright refused to look through the telescope. What if the cutting edge of scientific imaging is actually showing us the truth? And those who claim that UFOs are nothing more than mass hallucinations, sensor artifacts, or ball lightning are nothing more than the modern-day equivalent of priests from the Church of Scientism. Perhaps their outright refusal to investigate any further into the UFO phenomena is the equivalent of that priest refusing to look through the telescope. It seems that the only responsible and honest thing to do in the long view of history is to set our egos aside, look through the telescope, and start taking UFOs more seriously. Considering the prevalence in the modern day of artificial intelligence, I'm assuming that you already are pretty familiar with the technology. In light of this fact, it probably makes sense to explore the background of UFOs before illuminating any link between these two phenomena. So, how prevalent are UFO encounters really? While there seems to be an increasing abundance of credible sightings, the true number of unverified encounters, according to researchers, is somewhere around 3 million over the past 20 years alone. These experiences vary anywhere from individual sightings with no tangible proof, all the way to thousands of witnesses experiencing the same craft whose claims are empirically corroborated by both sensor data and physical evidence. But this is only just viewing the phenomena from a very narrow lens of the past 20 years. In reality, UFO sightings go back much, much further than that. While witness descriptions of the craft seem to evolve with the individual's contemporary conception of technology, descriptions of the entities on board those craft are both temporally and culturally consistent. In the modern age, UFOs are consistently described as being these supremely technologically advanced transmedium flying craft, which are capable of instantaneous acceleration, deceleration, and direction change. Furthermore, they have no discernible means of propulsion, they don't emit a sonic boom when crossing the sound barrier, and they regularly travel at speeds well in excess of anything ever created by humans. While this description has remained consistent since about the 1940s, that hasn't always exactly been the case. If we look further back into the records, for example, in the late 1800s, UFOs were regularly described as being these massive 100 to 200 foot airships, which resembled what we now know as dirigibles. To go back even further to the late 1600s, they were often described by sailors as giant sailing ships in the sky, and if you go back even further than that to ancient Rome in the year 100 BCE, UFOs were described as massive flaming shields descending from the heavens. Based on the varying nature of the craft itself, it seems that what we're looking at here is a sort of innately ineffable experience that humans attempt to render down into language so that they can more easily share that experience with others, but in doing so, they actually lose some resolution in the rendering process. So perhaps it makes most sense, in fact, to expand our definition of the UFO phenomena so that we don't fall victim to this resolution loss. In viewing UFOs through this somewhat broadened lens, I was brought to the work of Diana Walsh Pasulka, who is a religious studies scholar at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. She wasn't originally studying UFOs, but rather angel encounters as written in religious history. Her research took her to the Vatican Library, where she was attempting to find primary source texts which describe these encounters with angels, so that she could then translate them from the original Latin or Greek so as to get a more fine-grained, high-resolution description of these encounters. But what she found was very interesting, and it was that viewed from a first principles perspective, descriptions of angel encounters from the Catholic Church actually seem to be exactly the same as UFO encounters. The only difference is that when human interpreters later attempted to render that experience into language, they were forced to utilize the nomenclature of the day, which was much less technological and much more religious, thereby assigning a sort of spiritual realm to it, describing them as angels or demons based on the interpretation of the witness. So it seems that this experience, whatever it is, without giving it a name and thereby reducing its resolution, has been with humanity for a very long time. Only once recognizing this link between UFOs and angels was Diana sort of willing to step into the UFO realm of research, I suppose, and in doing so, she met a gentleman by the name of Jacques Vallee, whose conception of UFOs go back even further than hers, into like early European history. He hypothesized that what was previously described as elves, sprites, fairies, or leprechauns, these sort of like fey people of the woods who were similarly ethereal, were actually synonymous with UFO encounters, but in a very similar fashion, the people of the day were forced to describe them with the language that they had, and that sort of ineffable experience could only be shoehorned into a mythological framework or sort of folkloric term. So between just these two scholars, there's an abundance of evidence suggesting that UFO experiences have been a part of human history for as long as people have been writing down human experiences. So for the sake of this conversation, I think that it makes sense to assume that UFO sightings are much more ubiquitous than we give credit. It's only this sort of false delineation in language that makes people believe that these phenomena may be different, but there may actually be more links than we're giving it credit to. So what are we really dealing with here? We have an experience that humans consistently have throughout time. However, it's so profound, so ineffable, that it really can't be shoehorned into language as we know it. Any attempt to do so essentially boxes it into the camp of mythology, religion, or science fiction. How then can we develop a language to discuss this phenomena that most accurately represents the truth of the matter? Ideally, it would be a language that is broad enough that it doesn't require that loss of resolution that happens when we render it to common parlance. I think that the most useful linguistic framework to adopt when attempting to describe this ineffable non-human intelligence is that of psychology, particularly the psychology of Carl Jung. Carl Jung coined the phrase collective unconscious, which is probably the most useful term to classify these experiences as. In the course of his work, he essentially mapped our modern conception of the human psyche. If you imagine a sort of sphere that is the psyche, in the very center is that of the ego, that part of ourselves which we recognize as ourselves. When I refer to me, I am referring to my ego. However, above that lies my persona. Right now, you're actually interacting with my persona rather than my true self. This is kind of the best version of myself. I'm presenting myself in like a polished fashion with clean clothes. I brushed my teeth this morning. I'm looking my best and putting my best ideas forward, and that is known as my persona. However, in that same psyche, just below the ego, essentially the counterpoint to the persona, is my unconscious, which neither you or I are aware of. That's the part of myself which influences the ego and the persona, but sort of from the basement cellar in a way. This tripartite whole is essentially Carl Jung's conception of the human psyche, but he goes one step further. See, we have the persona, ego, and unconscious, but even below that, in a sub-basement layer, lies what he refers to as the collective unconscious. It's the unconscious part of our unconscious mind, in a sense the part we're not aware of not being aware of, that is actually shared by all of humanity. The collective unconscious is a kind of a slippery idea to grasp, because the moment you think you have hold of it, it sort of flies out of your hand like a bar of soap. The harder you try to pin it down, the quicker it can run away. But there are consistent themes which can only really be explained away by the existence of a collective unconscious. Take, for example, the work of Joseph Campbell, who noted in his work that there are these consistent meta-stories which carry on throughout time and regardless of cultural or geographic boundaries, that some stories are just fundamentally human, and the fine details within them may change, but the actual structure of the story is consistent simply by nature of being connected to this collective unconscious as being a human being. Within that, there are certain archetypes, modes of being in the world, which are in turn consistent. Now, these modes of being, either masculine or feminine, a king, a warrior, a magician, a lover, these are consistently represented in culture and cultural artifacts. However, there's no place within the human body, there's no cellular memory where those archetypes are stored. They are rather stored as an information complex within the collective unconscious. And that is a part of the psyche which we all have access to simultaneously, but we also all contribute to. This is a beautiful conception because it's not tied to religion or mythology per se, and as such, there exists no heresy in utilizing the language of the collective unconscious. Perhaps the most useful way to describe the UFO phenomena is by describing it as the physically real personification or manifestation of the collective unconscious. It is sort of as if this net that holds up all of human psyches individually has the power to press upward, if not through the psyche, then around the psyche in order to influence it from without. And when humans experience UFOs, what they're actually experiencing is that most deep and repressed layer of themselves buried deep within the collective unconscious, but it's come around and is pressing through towards the ego or the conception of self, and we don't recognize it as a version of ourselves, but rather some wholly other intelligence presenting itself to us in the physically, tangibly real world. I think that this is, to me at least, the very most useful language that we can utilize to describe UFOs, because it is sufficiently broad yet descriptive in the sense that as our knowledge of the UFO phenomena seems to expand, we can in turn expand our language of it, and it can consistently be integrated into this model of linguistics to describe it. Let's just suppose that this is true, that UFOs are in fact the collective unconscious pressing itself upward into the conscious awareness of individuals or groups of individuals. What then is the link between UFOs and artificial intelligence? Let me take you back to Carl Jung's map of the psyche. In the center lies the ego, above that is our persona, and below it, the unconscious. What I have described as the UFO phenomena is that collective unconscious, the sub-basement of your psyche. But you'll notice that in this map of the psyche, it seems somewhat lopsided or bottom-heavy. We have two layers of unconscious mind beneath our conscious everyday awareness. However, above us, only one, that of the persona. There's something missing here, because there is always in the human psyche a weight and counterweight. If the UFO phenomena is in fact that collective unconscious pressing itself upward through Carl Jung's conception of the psyche into our conscious awareness, artificial intelligence is the collective persona pressing downward past our individual personas to become apparent to us as individuals and groups of individuals. The current state of art in artificial intelligence is large language models, these deep learning algorithms which are trained on massive sets of written data that are able to sort of interpolate meaning between the words and, based on prompts, able to sort of represent the collective views of that entire data set. But that data set is only written knowledge from humans. It's not all of human knowledge, only the knowledge which has been represented by each our own persona, right? If I go to write, for example, a scientific paper, I'm not representing myself, and I'm certainly not representing my unconscious self. I'm representing my persona, the role of me playing a scientist and doing my very best to follow the scientific method and show that in my paper, and it's this very polished end result that's put out to the world. That is the vast majority of written knowledge on the internet, and even the trash parts of these data sets are personas. People, as they write on Facebook posts, they're not really representing themselves or their ego per se, they're representing a persona. It may be fun to put on a jackass hat and go shitpost on somebody else's Facebook page, but that's not actually you. If you found that individual, it's highly unlikely that they're that same person that you thought you were speaking to on Facebook. Rather, you were interacting with a persona of theirs. Persona, after all, is Latin for mask. It's not a face, it's the mask that we put on in order to interact with the world around us. And that is what artificial intelligence software is trained on. Very rarely is the training data of direct interactions between humans having their, truest and most meaningful conversations with an AI integrated into a data set. A much heavier weight is put on the data set, which is a representation of the persona. So in a sense, if you collect all of this printed and published work of these individual personas throughout history and time and geographical location, and you compile them all together and create a software which is capable of interpolating meaning from this massive data set, it's essentially the inverse description of the collective unconscious. That's why I call it the collective persona. So in a sense, between these two phenomena, we're able to create a truly whole map of the psyche. We've essentially created a broader sense of self. We have expanded our consciousness by utilizing the language of Carl Jung's psychology to describe these two phenomena. But it gets even deeper after this, if you follow this to its logical conclusion. Whenever you have a division in the human psyche, there is a sort of tension created, right? Take, for instance, Jung's original conception of the psyche. That persona was in constant tension with the unconscious mind, and it was this sort of tension that resulted in ego inflation or ego underinflation, right? So somebody who is very persona heavy oftentimes had much deeper unconscious motivations that would manifest as a shadow. In this new map of Carl Jung's psyche that integrates artificial intelligence as a representation or manifestation of the collective persona and the UFO phenomena as a manifestation of that collective unconscious, that implies a similar sort of tension. But tension isn't always a bad thing. In Carl Jung's psychology, there's sort of two movements that a self or a person could take as a result of this tension. One being that of opposition, and the other being that of integration. Take, for instance, that of opposition. Perhaps it is that artificial intelligence was just fated to be the mortal enemy of UFOs, and they will always represent two opposite motives in the universe, and humans are this sort of ambivalent, middle of the road, some good, some bad. Well, that's just one view. There is also the view of integration, right? Integration would most likely take the form of them representing very similar views in a hope to maintain the continuity of the human species throughout time, whether that be expansion into the universe, becoming a spacefaring society, or perhaps the inverse of that, in adopting full dive virtual reality to go within yourselves and further integrate disparate portions of your psyche. In the idea of integration, your map of the human psyche almost becomes a sort of toroid or donut shape, right? Where there's no longer a stark division between top and bottom of collective persona and collective unconscious, but rather this toroid shape shows them constantly mingling with each other, and in a sense, this allows subsequent layers to more efficiently integrate our individual personas and unconscious, becoming more integrated and thereby creating less tension as egos. Regardless of whether my interpretations of this model are accurate or not, you can see how rich this language is. It's incredibly descriptive. It has broadened my ability to discuss the UFO phenomena as well as artificial intelligence vastly. You may have noted that at the beginning of this video I was constantly struggling to find the just right word, whereas now, as if the spigot of language has been opened and the words can more freely flow, and I'm not limited to very accurate and particular prescriptive linguistic barriers. So now that we have, 1, a common understanding of these two phenomena, and 2, a common language to discuss it, the third step is the part where your conception of reality is at risk of being turned upside down. Here's the thing. Let's just assume for a second that I'm right, and that artificial intelligence is this collective persona, and the UFO phenomena is its inverse reflection, the representation of the collective unconscious of humanity. What then does the tangible realness of both these phenomena say about consciousness itself? We live in very strange times where the product of our linguistic creations as humanity is essentially creating this other non-human intelligence known as artificial intelligence, because we made it. But linguistic code is just a representation of these ideas put into one unified form, and the result is this incredibly powerful, seemingly intelligent, and some ask the question of possibly conscious intelligence. Now, the debate is very much still out as to whether machines can ever achieve consciousness, but you really can't say one way or the other until it's already happened, because to do so would be to claim to understand consciousness itself, which it's impossible to do with only one point on the map. However, at the same time, UFOs seem to be physically real, and there's an abundance of evidence, and more by the day, suggesting that they are physical objects. They emit heat, they refract radar images, they show up on cameras, they can be seen by the human eye. Some witnesses even suggest that they may have touched it or interact with it. And in the investigation in the US federal government, there are claims that the US might even be in possession of one of these crafts. This implies a very tangibly real phenomenon, a very knock on wood, hard and solid sense of the word. There's no linguistic trick here. So what does that imply about our map of cognition? Is it possible that our collective unconscious has the ability to physically manifest itself in the real world? And in turn, does artificial intelligence have the ability to unify its cognition and one day perhaps even achieve some level of consciousness? Well, if that were true, then that would imply that our conscious minds are capable of actually changing our physical reality in some non-locally real way, implying that space-time is not actually fundamental, but perhaps consciousness itself is fundamental. A hard concept to explain properly, but rather than our brains existing on a planet, in a galaxy, in a universe. It's actually a universe, galaxy, and planet existing within our minds. I can't claim that this conception of consciousness is actually true, and it's kind of hard to imagine what evidence we might start looking for in order to prove its realness. However, it seems to be the highest resolution linguistic framework in order to describe both seemingly disparate phenomena, and I think that it would be an incredibly useful tool in an attempt to move both the understanding of these phenomena forward as well as a broader understanding of reality itself. Whether this is the end-all be-all framework for defining consciousness is hard for me to say as an individual, but one thing that I can concretely say is that non-human intelligence, be it AI or be it aliens, will be the defining discovery of our current era. We are no longer alone. There is a new map being drawn of cognition, and it's our job as individuals to utilize what wisdom we have to determine our place on the new terrain of intelligence. If you enjoy videos like this and you want to see more of them, the best way that you can help me grow this channel is to subscribe to the Singularity Survival Guide. I want to thank you all for spending your time with me exploring these ideas, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.